absolutely tragic case, and my sympathies are absolutely with Henry's family, his friends and his loved ones. I want to apologise. I want to say that I am sorry that Henry couldn't be saved that night. I'm sorry that he was handcuffed and arrested in the moments before he lost consciousness. It's quite clear that officers didn't understand what had happened immediately. And that is some of the context I would ask people to understand. There had been a delay from those who chose eventually to call them. There were lies from Henry's killer in that 999 phone call, further lies from his killer as officers arrived on scene. And despite Henry telling officers he'd been stabbed, it took them some minutes to realise what had really happened. But within 3 minutes of that engagement with Henry, they were giving him first aid. They'd taken the handcuffs off and they were giving him first aid.
Took my turban off, started grabbing my head.
Are you injured?
Yeah, I've got swollen eye, little bruises.
Alright, just step back a little bit for me.
This is the first time we can clearly hear Henry say he's been stabbed in the footage, 49 seconds in. Then we see blue lights flashing as more responders arrive.
Right, let's get you out of there, shall we?
Police pull him along the ground.
Grab his other arm. What's happened to you, right?
This is the fourth time in the footage we hear Henry say he's been stabbed, 1 minute, 11 seconds after it begins.
You've been stabbed? Whereabouts? Don't think you have, mate.
We've muted the audio here because it's distressing. Henry groans as police pull his hands behind his back and handcuff him. In this section of the video, Henry repeatedly says he can't breathe.
He's saying he's been stabbed, so let's just check him.
1 minute, 48 seconds in, a police officer lifts up the side of Henry's top, but goes no further. Then we can hear someone say he hasn't been stabbed.
In the face? Oh no, but we have to check, don't we?
Right.
In the face?
Then, with police surrounding him, Henry says, "Please, brother, I can't breathe." In total, we've clearly heard Henry say he can't breathe 7 times. Police officers say Henry is under arrest and read him his rights. 2 minutes, 48 seconds after the footage begins, police call for an ambulance.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome once again to my channel, Stop Effing Killing. I'm your host, the MOD, also known as the Method of Delivery. Please like, share, and subscribe if you find anything that resonates with you. So, today we're going to talk about the Henry Nowak case out of Southampton, UK. As many of you are well aware of, there has been some rioting going on and clashes with police in Southampton because Henry Nowak had his life taken by a 23-year-old suspect whose name I will not say on this channel. Now, according to police reporting, there was this altercation between Nowak and the suspect, and allegedly Henry, hit the suspect and, knocked his hat off his head. So he pulls out this knife and takes his life. He stabs him. Now, this channel is, 100% against gratuitous violence. And if Henry did indeed initiate the attack, shame on him. However, England's laws and many of the United States laws are similar. And here in the United States, you can't pull out a deadly weapon and take someone's life because they punch you or they hit you, or they kick you or spit on you. You can't do that. You're escalating the situation to deadly force over a simple assault. But the thing about this case is not just that Henry was assaulted with a deadly weapon and his life was taken. It was the police response when they showed up. Henry was handcuffed after he'd been stabbed. And he was telling the police, "I've been stabbed." He told them that multiple times. "I can't breathe." He told them that multiple times. And the thing is, we always hear politicians and our leaders say, well, there's violent crime in this area. We need more police. We need more police. We need more law enforcement. We need more funding so we can hire more police officers. Now, I just suspect that a lot of that outrage, some of it obviously was purity people looking for an opportunity to loot and steal and tear up stuff. But I guarantee you there were a lot of people in that crowd who were fed up and who were venting with how law enforcement was treating them. Now I'm gonna preface that, tell you a little story about something that happened in a department I used to work for. So there was this apartment complex, and we got frequent calls in this apartment complex, and sometimes when you went in there, you had to fight people. You had to fight people and things like that. But for the most part, people understood that the police were doing their job. Trying to keep the peace. This one particular stretch, I went on vacation, and I started getting all of these calls about how some officers went in there and they stirred up a bunch of stuff, and people were throwing bottles at the police cars and cursing and just acting a damn fool. And I'm like, we've never had this problem out of this apartment complex. Is there crime there? Yeah, criminals, and we have to fight people, all this other stuff. Yeah, we had that, but we've never had, people acting this way in this apartment complex. So, when I came back from vacation, I had a lot of, officers saying, they were so glad I was back, because things were out of control in this complex. And I was like, well, let me just kind of try to get to the bottom of what the hell's going on. So I went to the complex and I talked to some of the security and some of the residents, and I'm like, listen, if officers are in here mistreating people, there are things that you can do to protect yourself and to, call attention to this, And eventually, after having been back and gone in there a few times and talking to citizens and talking to security and, just kind of smoothing things over, everything quieted down. Because you see, it's not about how many police you have in a particular area. It's not about that. It's about the quality of those individual officers. Regardless of what a leader says or the police chief says or the mayor or whoever or the president, regardless of what any of these people say, when it's all said and done, it's all up to the foot soldiers, the people on the bottom of the pyramid, which is going to always be your uniformed patrol officers. And those officers interact with citizens every single day. Now, I did a little digging, into the training that an officer in Southampton would have to go through to become a law enforcement officer. And they train anywhere from 2 years to 4 years, depending on what their position is. So it's not like, they just come in, fill out an application and start that day. No, they have to go through some sort of training to become law enforcement officers. And, every single time that I see a department getting sued, there's always this thing about training. The officers need more training. They need more training. They need more practice doing this. They need more help doing that. Well, the thing is, you cannot train malice out of the heart of an officer. You cannot train indifference or racism or prejudice, or classism, or someone who's power, drunk with power. You can't train those things out of a law enforcement officer. And that officer on the scene, when this man, whether he was a suspect or not, said that he had been stabbed, should have been given immediate medical attention. So Henry Nowak, an 18-year-old male, he shouldn't have been treated like that. He should not have been treated like that But the way that he was treated was 100% due to officers' indifference and just not giving a shit. And I get it, you know, officers get burned out on the job all the time. A lot of times they see so much violence, you know, that they become numb to it. They do, you know, I get it. But sometimes, and I do mean this, sometimes you have to put your personal biases aside and actually look at and analyze a situation for what it is. And those people in UK, in Southampton, who are out there rioting and protesting in earnest, I'm not saying that, you know, they should tear up the community where they live. I'm not saying that, because that's never right. But what I am saying is that a lot of times police and law enforcement get away with stuff, or they get away with things, and they're not held accountable for those things. And eventually it boils over into what we've been seeing in our news lately. My heart goes out to the Nowak family, or anyone who has lost their lives due to gratuitous violence. The suspect who's gotten, you know, who was given life in prison, and, you know, may he truly spend life in prison and never see the light of day again as a free man. But regardless, that's not going to bring Henry back. That's not going to, you know, bring any comfort to the Nowak family or members of any member of that community, you know, who's lost anyone. Because in the end, it's going to take all of us to call out when the police mess up, because they messed up more often than not, you know, more often than we know about. A lot of things get covered up and swept under the rug, but we got to call it out when we see it, because it's going to take all of us to hold law enforcement accountable and to honor the memory of those victims who've lost their lives due to gratuitous violence. Thank you, and have a safe day.